securely together in time. Punishment is going to come up about this here in just a little bit, but can we tell our dog to sit, push its hind end down, and then give it its treat 30 minutes later? No, it's not going to make that connection, okay? Think of even simple reflexive actions. How fast does the time between you touching a hot pot and your finger hurting, does it take for you to go, okay, I can't touch the pots when they're on the stove? I mean, it just takes a split second, and you're like, okay, that occurred. If your burning started, 30 minutes later, you're not going to make that connection, okay? Food poisoning is sometimes hard because the sickness from food poisoning occurs not exactly immediately, but very quickly. But still there's a time lag in there. You're not sure if you've got stomach flu or do you have food poisoning. I'm not sure because the timeline doesn't tell me it happened a second after I ate. Okay. And most species learn in a similar manner. So how you learn behaviors is very similar to the way your pets have learned behaviors, okay? So we see this process of making these connections and these associations between stimuli occurring, in other places. It's not just unique to us and our learning style. It is in other animal kingdoms as well. So let's talk about classical conditioning. We're all very familiar. I keep standing where I think y'all can't see me or can't see me. Pavlov's dogs. So what do y'all know about this classical conditioning? Where are y'all at on your learning with that?
Salivating.
Okay. When did the dog salivate? Did they salivate before that, or is it just when the bell rang? Okay. So let's go through these little numbers or this terminology. Okay. We're going to use Pavlov's dogs and ourselves. So if I brought with me this morning, which I think I probably should have, a bunch of donuts and breakfast burritos, maybe I'd get real snazzy and make my husband get up early to make all of y'all eggs Benedict and bring it in here. Makes a really good eggs Benedict. And pretend you like all that, okay? You smell it. I brought it in. It is filling up the room with the lovely aromas. Do you have to sit there and go, oh, there's donuts, mouth, salivate? No, it occurs what? Naturally, okay? So unconditioned stimulus is a stimulus that is occurring naturally in your environment. So has the food occurred naturally? Yeah, it's food. It's in your environment. Okay, it's already there. Okay? Your response to that stimulus is also very natural. Okay? So here's how I like to look at it. Unconditioned means unlearned. You do not have to learn anything from that parent, okay, from that stimulus. Okay? No learning has to take place because your response to it is automatic. Okay? So when food is presented, we salivate. We do it, the dogs did it. Okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring in an additional stimulus. Okay? And that additional stimulus for Pavlov, I keep touching my shirt on things. That additional stimulus for Pavlov was what? The bell, the tone, different places you read call it different things. So he didn't initially mean to do this. It was more he noticed what was happening and then started studying it. But what was happening was right before the presentation of the food, a sound would go off. Okay? Now, the first time this happened, even the first few times this happened, did the dogs immediately go, oh, that sound probably means I'm getting food? No. So most of the time, it takes repeated pairings of this stimulus for you to learn that the first one signals the second one. So when that bell was going off, initially it meant nothing. Okay, so that means it starts off as a neutral stimulus. Okay, once you learn that that neutral stimulus signals the next one, then it becomes the conditioned stimulus. okay? So bell's going off, food's being presented. They're still salivating when the food's present. You still salivate when the donuts are brought in, okay? After repeated pairings of bell, then food, bell, then food, bell, then food, eventually that bell became the conditioned stimulus, which means rather than salivate when food was presented, they salivated when? When the bell went off. That bell signaled that they were about to get food, so they started salivating with the presentation of the bell rather than the food. And that's where learning took place. So many times you will find that your unconditioned stimulus or unconditioned response and your conditioned response are often the same thing. You're just learning to respond to a different stimulus, okay? So let's think of some other examples. See what y'all come up with, and then I'll give us a few. Here, we'll do this. Can I look that up real quick?
Mhm.
This one. Sorry. Oh, that's not. Here we go. Smile, you're on candid camera. So let's go through a couple of examples, and then some other things will come up along the way. So this one's very similar. Your cat comes running every time it hears the can opener. Okay? So what is the unconditioned stimulus in this scenario? The food. Unconditioned means unlearned. So the natural stimulus in this situation would be the food. So the unconditioned response to the cat food would be what? Coming to it. You could say salivating, but they're probably gonna, you got food in the bowl, they're gonna go running to it. Now, was neutral, but now it's conditioned stimulus. The can opener. So now when they hear the can opener, they what? Come running. Okay, make sense? Okay, let's look at the next one. Your dog gets sick, requires several painful trips to the vet. Now he hides every time you rattle your keys. What is the unconditioned stimulus here? The painful procedures. Okay, he's having to go to the vet and it happened to him. And your natural response to a painful process is what? You're fearful. You're gonna want to hide from it, okay? Because you don't want it to happen. It hurts. So now, what is the conditioned stimulus? The keys rattling, because now he's learned that when you rattle your keys, it means what? I'm going to the vet to get something bad done. Okay, so your response to the keys is also the same to the vet procedure, which is fear, running away. Okay. This next one gives us a little bit different aspect, or something that can happen during the learning process, or type of learning. So Tom went out, drank too many screwdrivers. Then he went and ate pizza and salad with bacon bits. This sounding familiar for anybody? Okay. And then he got very sick, and now he refuses to eat bacon bits. So what is the unconditioned stimulus here? What has happened naturally? He has sick as a response to, he drank too much, okay? Then he got sick. So drinking too much is too much booze. Alcohol is your unconditioned stimulus. Getting sick is your unconditioned response. And then what happened? He drank too much and he went and ate and he got sick. So what could he have done in this scenario that previously wouldn't have been a big deal? Without the booze. Eating pizza and salad with bacon bits. Okay? Didn't mean anything, you just go and eat. But because he drank too much, then ate and got sick, what now? He doesn't want to eat the bacon bits. So what's the conditioned stimulus? The bacon bits. and the sickness. This is an example of taste aversion. How many of you got food poisoning somewhere? It only took one time, and now you're not eating there again, okay? I'll probably say for a lot of people, it might not even be, what he should be having aversion to is what? The alcohol. But because this is what came back up, that's what he thinks made him sick, and so now he doesn't want the bacon bits anymore, okay? So this is an example of taste aversion, and it usually takes only one pairing sometimes for these things to occur, and you don't want to ever have that food again, okay? So taste aversion. This next one, when you're in gym class, you get hit in the head repeatedly with a basketball. Soon you develop an aversion to not only basketball, but volleyball and football as well. So you're getting hit in the head, and now you do not like anything that involves a ball. So what is the unconditioned stimulus here? What's happening? Getting hit in the head. Good. So what is your response to getting hit in the head? You're not wanting to be around balls. Balls, okay? So then, what is happening?
Generalizing.
You're generalizing. Very good. Because now you're not only afraid of, you're in gym class. Conditioned stimulus is actually gym class here. And the fear of going to gym, because gym means what? You're getting hit in the head. Well, because now you don't like any of these kind of balls, you have generalized it to any kind of ball that could possibly hurt you, okay? Because a ball means getting hurt. What are some other places and examples where people might generalize their fear responses?
School in general.
Okay, what would be the, I think school in general. We could probably have some areas where that would work though. Okay, if you got bit by a dog, you may generalize to your fear being of not just dogs, but anything furry with 4 legs, okay? And does your fear response increase the closer it is to the original stimuli? Yes, okay?
So this is kind of like, would go with like phobias?
Yes, good thing to bring up. Our phobias are typically a reaction or a type of classical conditioning where you've made some associations between things and now you're fearful of those. So, anybody got a phobia you want to own up to happening in a classical conditioning type manner?
Well, when I was a kid, I was scared of thunderstorms.
Okay. And thunderstorms are a good example of how classical conditioning can work too. Because do we start getting antsy about thunder before the thunder ever gets there? Because we've learned what? The lightning comes first. So that's a process of classical conditioning. Okay? What else? I can give you a personal example of classical conditioning. You see this example a lot, but until you lived it, you don't really know if it's a true thing or not. So, going to the doctor's office was usually not a big deal for me. It's usually not a big deal for anybody. You don't like it. You know, that's a natural response. Nobody likes going to the doctor, but it's not really a huge big deal. But after having chemo, when did I start feeling, it wasn't just the chemo. I'd get sick when I had chemo, but what started happening, and even still happens to this day with me. Headed there the day before, knowing it was about to all happen. I could be having a great day, and then it just like, you pull up into the parking lot, and it's just like the fear, the anxiety comes all over you, because I know what's about to be pumped into my body. So that getting sick before chemo ever happens, it really has happened. And that would be an example of classical conditioning. One more example we can do. Do a couple more. Let's do the first one. Have any smokers in here? I won't give you a lecture, I promise. Okay, no. So, you wanna quit smoking, you sit at home and give yourself a shock every time you reach for a cigarette. Got your own little Milgram shocker, okay? Your smoking decreases. However, when you go out with your friends, your smoking returns to the same level. What is this an example of? We did generalization, now what's happening here? Say it again.
Spontaneous recovery.
Not yet. Discrimination. What is this person discriminating between? Yes. So you're shocking yourself, you don't like it, there's that fear anxiety response. And then what eventually happens is you reach for a cigarette, you know that, oh, it's going to shock me, so I'm not going to have that. But that's only happening at home. Are you shocking yourself when you're going out with your friends? No. Do y'all have places like that where at home you do one thing but you go out and you do something else? Okay. Huh? Dieting could be a good example, yeah. Do you know people that, like, maybe not dealing with just quitting smoking, but they have that very discriminatory behavior of they only smoke, like when they're drinking and they're out with friends and things like that. It's like the bar signals you have to smoke for some reason. I mean, that is a discriminatory type of behavior that you're just making distinctions between A and B. Okay, and your behavior is different both places.
That reminds me of the research on spanking,
Mhm.
right? Because if a child is spanked, then they diminish the behavior in front of the person who spanks them, but that doesn't generalize. They don't diminish the behavior broadly.
That's probably why, teachers say, oh, your kid is so great and wonderful, and you're like, what? That's my child you're talking about? Okay, so any questions over those examples? We'll go ahead and we'll move on. All right, so some of this we've already covered, so we'll keep up. So these are the things we just went through, some examples of generalization, discrimination, extinction. I'll go back to like the animal one too. A lot of people generalize those fear responses to a particular type of animal, but some of them do get discriminatory. So maybe you got bit by, a Doberman. So small dogs you're okay with, but large dogs you're not. Other places I've seen people be discriminatory would be in a swimming pool. They're fine, but you put them in like a lake or an ocean, typically where they can't see their feet, because of a bad experience of some sort. They tend to have some trouble with that kind of body of water. Then generalization, ones that don't like any kind of body of water. So now she had mentioned spontaneous recovery. So one of the places where Watson failed in his experiment, which now makes it one of the big ones you read about as far as ethics goes, is what? Okay, he trained the little Albert, or conditioned, I guess I should say instead, to be fearful of white furry objects, and it was a generalized response. And then, if little Albert's still alive today, is he going to be happy when we show him something white and furry? No. Okay, so they did not go through what we would call an extinction process, which is where the conditioned response gradually disappears. What could Watson have done with little Albert to diminish that fear response of white furry things?
Start rewarding them.
Well, just stop the conditioned stimulus. Stop making that loud banging noise every time you present him with something white and furry. With Pavlov, what would you need to do? Stop ringing the bell. Okay? So you stop that conditioned stimulus, and eventually what happens is they go back to that natural, unlearned response pattern. But what we find is, after time passes, and you see studies that do the spontaneous recovery at different time frames, that, with the dogs, 30 days later, a bell rings randomly. What are we going to see these dogs do? Are they going to salivate to it? Possibly. Now, will that salvatory response be as strong as it was during the initial conditioning process? No. Okay, but it can still be there. Okay. I personally, this is just a personal preference in terminology. I do not like the word extinct. To me, extinct means it's not coming back. Okay, ever. It's gone for good. And what we know with learned behaviors is you can go through this process to get rid of the conditioned stimulus. You can go through a process of changing, like we'll talk about punishment stuff here in a minute, but does that behavior always have the opportunity to return? Yes.
I guess like another example would be like a victim of some sort. Like they might be out of like whatever their stimulus was, but like if something reminds them of that scenario or where they were a victim, like that, it never like completely goes
Okay,
to the
so
extinction
let me see if this is what you're talking about. So let's say we'll take an abusive relationship. Let's take someone who's in an abusive relationship. They get out of it. That abuser is gone, and they've been out of that scenario maybe for a couple of years. If someone raises their hand towards them, might that initiate that cowering feeling again? So is that what you're kind of talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a spontaneous recovery. Sure. So I personally don't like the word extinct, but they didn't ask me, so.
Well, and that reminds me too, just to tie it back to last week's lecture, y'all, that extinction process is the same as when we treat phobias, specific phobias, doing that hierarchy of fears and doing exposures, consistently more realistic exposures to feared stimuli, right? So it's very similar. You're trying to extinguish the fear response related to the phobia. And it reminds me also of treatment for PTSD, where you do prolonged exposure to the stimulus while encouraging calm behaviors. And so you do prolonged exposure to extinguish the fear response or the hyperstimulation and hypervigilance that we see in PTSD. So we see that this behavioral learning, if you can generalize this principle, it generalizes really broadly to clinical psychology, to learning and memory, to educational psychology, to a lot of different areas. So if you can really conceptualize this, you'll be able to generalize it to a lot of different areas.
Going back to our memory lecture, this would be one of those places where you don't, like she said, compartmentalize, the spontaneous recovery just as it applies to this behavioral learning principle. If you make that multiple connections in your memory of all the different places that can apply, then you're going to remember that concept better and how it works. So.
And with spontaneous recovery, if you are familiar with that principle and you're treating somebody for PTSD, and you help them to anticipate that could be a response, that there could be some spontaneous recovery, but that it's going to be a weaker response, then that's not so defeating, right? Because PTSD is one of those difficult to treat conditions, right? It's pretty intractable. And it's because sometimes we experience spontaneous recovery and we don't recognize it for what it is, which is a much less intense reaction. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work, right? It's a typical part of recovery.
All right, any questions about classical? Okay, we're gonna have to move really quickly. So, classical conditioning, I'm gonna add to the beauty of this mess here, I don't know if you can see this, is a stimulus response system. So you're presented a stimulus and you respond to it, okay? Operant conditioning works differently. You have a response, and that is followed by a stimulus, which usually comes in the form of a reinforcer, okay, of some sort, some type of reinforcement. So the systems, although you're dealing with behaviors and learning new behaviors, the process in which the learning occurs is different, okay? So classical is stimulus response, and then operant is response, and then the stimulus, okay? So one of the things we want to do here is one of two things with operant conditioning. We either want to increase the chances of you repeating a behavior over, or we want to decrease the chances of you repeating that behavior. And that would be where punishment comes in. okay? So we either want to reinforce or punish a behavior. We have different types of reinforcers and different types of reinforcement and punishment. I'm going to talk really fast so I can make sure I get through all this. Primary reinforcers are things that we usually need for survival of some sort. So, food is a reinforcer. Food's probably the best one. Okay. A secondary reinforcer is one we learn in connection with a primary reinforcer. So let me ask you, how many of you work? Why do you work? You work for money. Money is your reinforcement, okay? I'm assuming none of you work for free, right? So you work in order to get reinforced. And do you have to work before you get paid, or they pay you first? If you have the pay first job, I want that one, okay? So you have to work first, which is another key point of operant, that you actually have to perform the behavior before you get reinforced for it, okay? So you work, you get money, but what does that money help you get? Stuff, food, okay? So your secondary reinforcers usually help you also obtain your primary reinforcers. So positive reinforcement, there's also positive punishment, and same thing with negative reinforcement, negative punishment. We'll talk more about those. So like I said earlier, the purpose of both is either to increase the likelihood that you'll do a behavior again or decrease it, and they can both be reinforced, either given in a positive or a negative form. So positive means something is, I hate it when I leave animations in there. Positive means that a stimulus is being added. So with positive reinforcement, you are getting something pleasurable as a reinforcer for a behavior that you had performed, and the chances of you doing that behavior are therefore increasing as well. So in elementary school, did anybody get money for your grades? Okay, and did that make you want to get good grades again so you could get more money? Yes, no, maybe? Yes, okay. We've talked about puppies already. Does your pet continue to do the trick that you want it to do so it gets its treat? Absolutely. Sometimes they keep doing it because they think you're just going to keep giving it to them, which is where you get into, when you're learning a behavior initially with operant conditioning, you do what we call continuous reinforcement, which means you reinforce every time the behavior is performed. Performed probably is not a good word. And then we certainly go to an intermittent reinforcement system where you don't reinforce every time, you get on some type of reinforcement schedule. So do I give my dog a treat every time he sits? No. Just, not even necessarily other times, it's kind of random, which we'll get to here in just a minute. Negative means that something has been removed. So this is the one that people have the most trouble with, okay? Most people think negative reinforcement and punishment are the same thing, and they are not, okay? Remember, reinforcement means that you are, when you're talking about reinforcement, whether it says positive or negative negative in front of it, you are wanting to increase the chances of a behavior again. But when you put the word negative, we think it means something bad here. All this means is we're taking away something, okay? We're taking away something that is unpleasant or unwanted so that you will increase the chances of performing that behavior. So here's the example here. Chris doesn't have to clean the garage if he mows the lawn today. The students don't have to take the final if they have perfect attendance, okay? Is a final exam very anxiety provoking?
Yes.
Is there anybody in here that absolutely adores a final exam? No. And even the word final exam, does your back just starts to cinch up because it's just a stressful? If you could avoid that stress, would you do that?
Yes.
Yes. So if that meant you have to come to class every day to avoid that, would you do it? Well, we don't, but the thought is good, and that would be negatively reinforcing yourself. I'll give a more realistic example. I know you've got a big paper, okay, right? And here and probably in some other classes. And they're usually due, I don't know when yours is due. But,
It's toward the end of the semester.
okay. Any class you've ever had that had a project due at the end of the semester, how much stress does that put on you?
Depends on the weight of the grade.
Okay,
But
okay. It's a big chunk,
yeah, it's,
okay? It's a big part of your grade. It could make or break it. It'd be make a letter grade difference. There is a way to avoid a lot of the stress that brings on, because what students usually do is they start working on that when? End of the semester, right before it's due. So all semester, you've got this little monkey on your shoulder going, work on me, work on me, work on me. And you just let it build and build and build, and you just want to knock it off, but it's not going anywhere. It's still there, and it's causing you stress. What could you do to avoid that anxiety, or at least lessen it? Work on it throughout the semester. Work on it early. Knock it out so you don't have to worry about it at all. Okay? That is a negative reinforcement. Let's do some very simple examples. People don't like it when I use that example because they know they're not doing that. They're not reinforcing themselves. So, anybody here like having a headache? No. It's unpleasant. What do you do when you have a headache? You take medicine. If the medicine takes away your headache, are you likely to take that medicine again next time you have a headache? That's negative reinforcement. It's not bad. You're just getting rid of something that is unpleasurable, and when it's successful, the chances of you repeating that behavior are going to increase. You're going to take a Tylenol, the exact same brand probably even, next time you have a headache because that's what worked. Okay? So where are y'all having problems with understanding negative reinforcement? Do you see how it's different from punishment?
punishment is suppressing.
Punishment is suppressing. So I'm going to skip to that real quick. So a punishment usually leads to immediate compliance, but then it also can lead to some bad behaviors as well. I like to throw this in there. So most of the time we're good for a while, but then sometimes punishment turns into, well, how can I just not get caught doing the behavior? And you find that more, I stole this from a talk that I've given in Ed Psych about punishing students in school. What we really should focus on more as far as reinforcement and punishment goes is not even positive reinforcement in terms of extrinsic motivators or extrinsic reinforcement. If I give you a treat, you are relying on me to reinforce you for a behavior. We should focus more on what type of reinforcement. Intrinsic. That you do things because you want to.
Okay, I was thinking like expectation.
Oh, no. Intrinsic versus extrinsic. So are you going to always rely on someone else to give you that reinforcement? Or are you going to find that positive reinforcement from within? Volunteer work is usually a good example of intrinsic motivators or extrinsic reinforcement. You do it because you want to. I volunteer on Friday mornings at a breast cancer center, and I do not get paid for it. I actually have to spend money to do it because I've got to travel to the location, but it makes me feel good, and I enjoy doing it. I think you take that intrinsic motivation out the second you rely on somebody else to reinforce you for it. So if they suddenly started paying me for it or something, I would then be extrinsically reinforced. Also, only temporary behavior changes. And here's my example here. How many of you have been pulled over and got a speeding ticket?
We don't have.
Oh, come on, people. No one's gotten a speeding ticket in here?
Oh, I have.
You have? Okay. I don't know. That's just my basic example. Anyway, okay. Those of us that have had a speeding ticket. For a while, do we usually watch our speed? Yes. And then what happens? We start speeding again. So we were punished, but it only worked short time. It didn't suppress it for the long haul. Okay? Reinforcement can be continuous or intermittent. Are y'all familiar with the reinforcement schedules? They can either be based off time or ratio. You have a fixed interval, meaning a set of time will pass before the next reinforcement. So if you get paid every 2 weeks, are you on a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement? Yes, okay. A variable interval schedule is the average amount of time that will pass, an average amount of time that will pass before the next reinforcement. If you, maybe you get rewarded after, a week, might be 2 weeks, might be 4 weeks. I would say, probably getting your grades back for assignments. You never know when exactly that's going to happen. You might get your grade the next day, or you might get it back in a week or two. If you take tests for me on Blackboard, when do you get reinforced for taking the test? Immediately, okay? Are there other classes you have where you never know exactly when your grade's going to pop up, a week, a day, a month? Then that's more variable. Fixed ratio means a set amount of behaviors has to occur before the next reinforcement. So if you only get rewarded after, reading 10 articles, every time you read 10 articles, you get reinforced for it. Where a variable ratio might be more like a car salesman. You might get your check after 3 cars, 4 cars, 5 cars. You just never know how many it's going to be. Now, these all have different rates of responding. Some are better than others. Your variable schedules, whether interval or ratio, are always going to be get a better rate of responding. If you know exactly when something's going to happen, you usually wait till the last minute to do it. It takes studying. You know exactly when a test is going to be, so you wait and study right before that time period. If it's a class that has pop quizzes, are you likely to study a little bit more regularly because you never know when that pop test is going to occur? So variable schedules are always the best. And variable interval probably even being the better one of the two of those. Okay? And we're out of time. I was almost done. I think I had a little bit of punishment, but I really just wanted to get the difference of